welcome to Chef Share Sessions. My name is Ana Dominguez, and today we're gonna work on some Genoise cake. Genoise cake, it's an egg foam cake, and it basically relies only on the air that we whipped into the eggs so it can rise, all right? More specifically, Genoise cake, it's a warm foam cake. So let's get started. All right, so for this recipe, we are gonna use 300 grams of eggs, 200 grams of cake flour. It does need to be cake flour. It does has a lower protein content as opposed to if you use all-purpose flour, and you really don't want to use anything above that protein content, which would be bread flour or high gluten flour. You really want to use cake flour. If you have on hand pastry flour, that would work too, just not go all the way up to all-purpose flour, right? So 200 grams of cake flour, 200 grams of sugar, regular sugar, and 66 grams of butter. You can also use any type of oil like canola oil, olive oil. My preference, it's because butter adds flavor and also the fat content, but it also adds flavor, all right? So the first step we're gonna do, since it is a warm foam cake, we're gonna combine our eggs. Again, this is 300 grams of eggs, and we're gonna add to this our 200 grams of regular sugar. You're gonna whisk this together. All right, that's combined, and now we're gonna transfer this to a warm water bath. All right, you have to get this all the way up to 40 degrees Celsius or like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You can take your thermometer and temp it out, or I'll show you how to do it just with your fingers, which is not really recommendable, but if you don't have a thermometer in hand, that's definitely something you can do. All right, so let's go to the water bath. For safety reasons, of course, always assume that everything that's close to the stove is hot, so I am using a towel. And you're gonna vigorously whisk this for about a minute, again, until it reaches the desired temperature, which is 100 degrees, or until basically the sugar has completely dissolved. And just keep whisking. Don't ever stop. Otherwise, if you stop, you can make sweet scrambled eggs, which is not desirable. You would have to start all over again. And again, it's just gonna take about a minute. Remember, with your double boiler or your hot water bath, you don't want the bowl touching the water. It's just the vapor that it's transmitting the heat to the bowl. And just keep whisking. You do want to make sure to whisk the sides and make sure that you're whisking the bottom. That way nothing's getting cooked to the bowl. If you start seeing lumps, like it's getting lumpy or it's getting thicker, then you're probably overdoing it. Keep whisking, keep whisking. So right now I am gonna temp it just so you can see. But again, the purpose is basically for the sugar to dissolve, so you can also feel that with your fingers. And if it feels slightly warmish, you are good with that too. So in order to take the temperature, I am actually gonna take it out of the heat. If you try to take the temperature while you're keeping the bowl in the double boiler, chances are you're gonna overheat it. So I am gonna stick my thermometer in. 89, 92, 95, 98, 103. So that means we are ready. I'm gonna set this aside so I can sanitize it. But again, if you don't have a thermometer in hand, if you stick your finger in there and you rub it, you shouldn't feel any sugar granules, right? You shouldn't, because At that point, at that 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the sugar should all be dissolved, all right? So now that this step is done, we are gonna transfer this onto our mixer. Remember, be very careful, especially depending on the size of pot that you use. Your mixing bowl sometimes can be very hot from the stove, so just make sure you're using towels to secure this in place. Again, sometimes this part of the mixer, the bowl, it's hot, so you don't want to get burned by that. All right, we're gonna use the whip attachment. And now we're gonna set it on high for about 5 minutes. While this is whipping, because again, it is gonna take about 5 minutes, you can start by sifting your flour. I already have this one sifted, but I'm still gonna sift it once I'm adding it to the cake, just to ensure that there's not gonna be lumps of flour when I'm mixing it in. While this is also mixing, you can melt your butter. This one is already melted. Of course, if you're using oil, you can skip that step. If you are adding any vanilla flavor to your cake, which is not necessary, you don't have to, but if you want to, you would add it to your melted butter or your oil. There are some recipes that also have milk within the recipe. This just happens to be the very, very basic Genoise cake, the one that EPC students actually need in order to pass their practical pastry exam, in order to graduate. So I'm not adding any of that extra ingredients. And while this is also mixing, you can also prepare your pan. So in here I have 9-inch pan. I made a cake circle that is gonna go in the bottom. And you don't have to, but in this case, since I have to pull the cakes really fast from the oven, like unmold them, I do like to line the sides with paper. This is a step you can definitely skip. You don't have to. So while we wait for this, I'm just gonna show you real quick how to make that cake circle faster than using just scissors, right? You're gonna take, well, depending on the size of your cake pan, but in this case, because basically this fits, but instead of us like having to draw a circle and cut her around, you don't wanna spend time on doing that. What we're gonna do is you're gonna take a half sheet of parchment paper, you're gonna fold it in half. This is basically gonna be the center of your circle. You're gonna fold it in half again. Remember, this is the center of your circle. You're gonna fold it again and fold it again. Once you have it like this, you're gonna take the bottom of your cake pan and you're gonna measure, basically you're gonna place the point that you just folded into the very center of the cake pan. You're gonna measure out and basically your cut is gonna be right there. So you can take some scissors for that, or you can just tear it from here and you would have your perfect cake circle to put on the bottom, all right? For this type of cake, I am gonna spray the pan, but just only so the paper can stick to the pan. Just a light spray. I'm gonna set my bottom. And again, this is a step you can definitely skip. I just like to do it because it makes my life easier trying to unmold the cakes, especially when I am in a hurry and I don't have time for the cakes to completely cool down within the mold. A little bit more spray. Again, the spray is just so the paper sticks. You don't want to overspray or over grease your pan because that can affect the way the cake's gonna rise. All right, and there you go. Our cake pan is prepared. I'm gonna set this to the side for when we need it. Now this has been mixing for about 3 minutes, or a little bit less, but I am gonna show you the stage at which this is. So if you lift it up, you can form, you can make an S, or basically this is called the ribbon stage, because if you tilt your whip, you lift the whip and do this motion, it's gonna form ribbons that are gonna stay. So basically at this point we are at the ribbon stage, which is what we want. I am gonna go a little bit because they're disappearing quite fast, so you want them to hold a little bit better. I am gonna keep whipping this a little bit longer at high speed. Again, I'm just trying to get to a stiffer consistency. It's only gonna take about 30 seconds, a minute more. And after that has get thicker, I am gonna turn the speed down to stir or speed 2, so the lowest possible speed that your mixer or hand blender has. And this is because right now you're aerating the preparation and you're creating big air bubbles. So the thing is, if we just take it from there and add the flour, fold in the flour and put it in the oven, the cake's gonna have very, very big air bubbles. Then when you cut through, you're gonna be able to see that. And you want a cake that it's a little bit more smooth, that the crumb doesn't have big holes. So that's why by turning the mixer or your hand mixer into the lowest possible speed for a couple of minutes, it's gonna basically make all the air bubbles be the same size. Not too big, not too small, they're all gonna be the same size. So let's check this again. Right, so I'm still gonna go a little bit more. Remember, this is a Genoise cake. It's a very, you saw it, it's very few ingredients. It's an easy cake. The hardest part is to get the technique right. It's an easy cake, but it does require a lot of technique. And the most important thing is to get the air right. Because again, we don't have any chemical that is gonna help the cake to rise. All it is depending on, it's the air that we're whipping into the eggs. So let's get this going. There are some other recipes that have added flavors to it, like you can make a chocolate Genoise cake. It's only gonna have some cocoa powder added to it that you would mix with your flour and make sure you sift them together. You can have matcha Genoise cake. You would, again, use matcha powder that is sifted into the flour. And of course, you can add flavorings to it. You can add almond extract, lemon extract, orange extract. If you are trying to add any liquid to it, I would highly suggest just add it into your melted butter or your oil. That way, we're not deflating the preparation too much by adding way too many ingredients, all right? All right, let's shake this again. And I would say that's a pretty good consistency for ribbons. Now, again, if you kind of see, you can actually tell some of the big air bubbles that there is. So that this is why we're gonna put this back in the mixer, and we're just gonna set it at a very low speed. Just a couple of minutes, at least a minute. Again, what this is gonna do is it's gonna turn those big air bubbles into all same size bubbles. All right, so it's very low speed. We're just gonna leave it running for a minute or two, and then we're gonna proceed to fold in the flour. Again, if you skip this step, the only thing that's gonna happen, your cake's gonna rise perfectly. It's gonna have actually more of a rise, but again, once you cut in through the cake, within the crumb, you're gonna see bigger holes. So that's the one thing that we're trying to avoid doing this step. Mind you, while you are before you even start, you do have to preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, all right? If you are baking multiple cakes, I would highly suggest turning that up by a little to 230, 235 degrees Fahrenheit, just because it's more volume that you're baking, and it's gonna take a little bit more temperature. I'm only baking one cake, so I do have my oven at 325 degrees. Mine also, I'm using a convection oven, which also has airflow and helps the baked items to bake faster and evenly. If you, in a conventional oven, like the oven you have at home, you don't have that airflow, but 325, it's still a really good temperature to bake this type of cake. If the temperature is too hot, it's gonna rise too rapidly, and it's gonna start to set the sides while the center is still very, very raw. So that's why you don't wanna use a temperature that's too high. So 325, it's a good temperature. All right, this has been mixing at a very low speed, the lowest that you can, for about 2-3 minutes. So we're gonna continue with the process. Now, if you see it, now you can really see big bubbles. It's still at the ribbon stage, but there's no big bubbles, like visible big air bubbles. This is gonna give you, again, a more evenly crumb texture in your cake. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add the flour. Again, mind, this is I pre-sifted this flour. This is already sifted flour, but just to make sure, I'm gonna sift it on top of my cake again. Sifting your flour, it prevents lumps of flour when you're mixing, but it also aerates the flour and helps you keep that air that you whipped into your eggs. So now you're gonna fold in the flour, folding motions from the center out. Make sure you're scraping the sides and going all the way to the bottom from the center out. And you're gonna keep folding until you don't see any dry ingredients, in this case, flour. I keep spinning my bowl, but you can totally just leave it static in one place. I'm just very used to doing so. I don't even think about it. All right, remember, you're trying to be very, very gentle because you're trying to take care of all of that air that we created. All right, I'm still scraping all the way to the bottom and still see a little bit of flour. Gentle, gentle. And I think we're there. Now, at this point, we're gonna go ahead and add the fat, which is optional. You can definitely stop right here. I do like adding fat just because it is gonna give me a richer cake. It's not gonna be so dry. All right, at this point, we are ready. You have two options. Either you add your fat in a streamline, though because it's liquid, it's gonna kill the air very quickly. So what I'm gonna do, this is what I like to do, that way I don't run the risk of deflating my batter too much. I'm gonna take some of the batter and I'm gonna add all the fat and liquids, whichever they might be, if you're adding any flavoring, to this batter, and I'm just gonna mix it. Doesn't matter if you deflate it a little bit, you're basically sacrificing a little bit of the dough. That way it's not so much of a shock once you add it back. Now I'm gonna add it back to the batter. And I'm gonna fold that in. See, this is gonna make it way easier for you to fold it in as opposed to just adding the fat or any other liquid ingredient in there. Just make sure it's very evenly folded. Everything's getting combined, that you don't see a color difference. And that's about it. I don't want to do any more. Has a nice flow. Now we're gonna add it to our prepared cake pan. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it in the oven, but before you do that, you do wanna give it a little bit of taps. If you see, a lot of the big bubbles are bursting to the top, and so you do wanna get rid of way too big air bubbles. And that's it. And like this, we're gonna go inside of the oven for 35 minutes at 325 degrees. I have my oven ready. Set it in. We're gonna set a timer of 35 minutes. Start it off. And that's it. Let's wait until it's done. All right, it's been 35 minutes in the oven at 325, so we're gonna go ahead and pull it out. And up in the oven. And if you do wanna check it, if you touch it and it bounces back, you're ready to go. So this is ready to go. I'm gonna pull it out. All right, look at the beautiful cake. So at this point, I am gonna go ahead and flip it upside down. I do like to cool them like that because if you see, like especially this one, it has a little bit of a bump. So once I'm cooling them upside down, it's gonna help to keep the structure, but it's also gonna give me a flat, even cake, and that way I'm not gonna have any type of cake left over when I do have to trim them, all right? So I'm just gonna flip it upside down. And I'm just gonna choose to cool it down like this. Because I did line the cake pan with paper, in about 5 minutes, I'm just gonna lift the mold up and I'm gonna let it cool down without the mold. What this does is that it prevents the cake from getting too soggy from being cooled in the pan, but there's nothing bad with cooling the pan. I do suggest that you unmold them as soon as they're a little bit cool, all right? All right, guys, now that we have pulled our cake from the oven, we flipped it onto a sheet pan, and it's been cooling down. It's time now, we can pull the mold out. See, that's beautiful. We can peel the papers out. See, and that's why I like to do this step of the paper on the sides, but again, you don't have to. This one, definitely you have to. All right, and see, that's what it did. Me cooling it down, flipped, it kind of made me have more of a even cake, all right? So now I'm just gonna go ahead and cut it. Just so we can see the inside. And there you go, it's a very spongy cake. Very spongy cake. You can see an even texture. We do have a couple of big air pockets. I don't see a lot of problem with that. It's a good genoise. So what you don't want to see, it's a very, very tight crumb at the bottom and then a very open crumb. That would be signs of improper mixing, all right? So you can kind of see that in this cake, the crumb, it's even. So this is what you want to see, all right? And that's it, guys. This is how you make a perfect genoise cake. And we'll see you again in another Chef's Share session.